Today I'm going to have a crack at making some unusual bread. This is based on a recipe from Mary's Test Kitchen for a keto bread. I'm not aiming for exactly the same thing today. I'm not doing keto, but I'm going to have a go at something based on that. It is made from vital wheat gluten, milled flaxseed, and it should be oat fibre, but I'm going to use oat bran. Oat fibre is from the outer husk of the oats, and it's completely carb free, I think. Oat bran is the coarser bran layer, still low carb. So anyway, first though, before I do anything else, I need to bloom the yeast, because this is the kind of yeast that needs that treatment. So just to keep things nice and easy to remember, I'm going to go for 125 ml of warm water, just blood heat. To that we will add a teeny tiny sprinkle of sugar, maybe like about half a teaspoonful of sugar. Now of course, putting sugar in what's ostensibly a low carb bread here might seem a bit counterintuitive, but this is to feed the yeast. And about a teaspoonful of yeast in there. Leave that in a warm place to bloom, and we'll know it's working when it's all frothed up. While that's happening, I might as well weigh out the dry ingredients. We're going to have 100 grams of oat bran. Now I've put this in the hand blender and just blended it up a bit finer than it was when it came out the packet. We want 125 grams of milled flaxseed. That's a lot of flax. And then we want 175 grams of wheat gluten. So gluten is the part of the wheat that makes bread work. It's the protein part of the wheat that gives bread its structure. 175 grams of this. Oops, a little bit over, but that'll be fine. We are going to want a little pinch of salt. I'm just going to give those dry ingredients a little mix, sort of whisk together, just to see what it looks like. Obviously this is going to make a brown bread, and it might be a little bit coarser than the recipe I've based it on, because I'm using oat bran instead of oat fibre. But I think it'll still work. It's the gluten that makes bread work anyway, so that's all in there. Okay, now we just got to wait for the yeast to bloom before I can mix it up. Right, just taking a look at this yeast now. It's definitely bloomed. So the wet ingredients can go into the dry now. So that's the yeast plus, that's got 125 ml of the water. And then we want a further 225 ml of water to make it up to 350. In terms of a normal bread ratio, that sounds a bit on the wet side, but I imagine it's because this bran and gluten and flax and so on is a bit more absorbent than regular flour. Now we could mix that and then knead it by hand forever, but I'm going to use these dough hooks on my little hand mixer here. I'll probably give it a good mix, then I'll let it stand for a bit, let the gluten hydrate and autolyse, and then we'll come back and give it another mix. So as I work, I can already feel that gluten's starting to work and it's coming together into a ball of dough. But I'm going to stop now, cover it over, leave it 20 minutes or so, and then we'll come back and give that another mix. Time has elapsed, and this is now, well, it's a very springy ball of dough because of all of that gluten. But anyway, let's have another go at mixing. Well, I reckon if you tried to knead that by hand, you'd probably break your wrist because it is so stretchy and springy. But hopefully that will give us a really fluffy and open bread texture. Time will tell. A little bit of oil in my loaf tin. I'll just get that ready. I probably shouldn't use flour for this because this is meant to be a low carb bread, but I'm not making it for that reason, so I am going to use a little bit of flour just to stop things sticking here. So just need to bring that together into a ball. Gosh, it really is, it's got so much gluten, it's like a rubber ball or something. We'll try and roll that out flat. Okay, and then I'm going to roll that up and then jam it in this loaf tin, if we can, with the the seam underneath. Press that down. And now we've got to let that double in size. So I'm just going to cover it up and leave it for however long that takes. That's had a couple of hours actually, but it's looking good. Time to get the oven on, preheated to 210 degrees Celsius. So we've got a tray of boiling water already in there. And that goes in there 40 minutes. That looks like a nice loaf of bread. So I'm just going to let that cool for about 5 minutes, but make the tin cool enough to handle. Then we'll turn it out and see what it looks like. Right, time has elapsed. That tin is now safe to handle. And there's the loaf. And it doesn't feel crusty anymore. It feels soft now. That actually looks really good. And it smells very good as well. Right, this bread's had about 45 minutes cooling. Probably could do with a little bit longer. It is still warm, but I think it's set enough that we can slice it and see what we got. Well, that looks like brown bread to me. That's an amazingly soft crumb. I suppose it's the gluten that does that. It smells quite brown bread. You know, as well it might. It is brown bread. You know, I like a tasty wholemeal bread, so, you know, I'm hopeful about this. I think I should probably taste a little bit with butter just now before we go and make some sandwiches. I cut a piece of the crust. I'll get a bit for Jenny as well. Jenny, do you want to come and try this bread? So that's what it looks like close up. I think that looks pretty good. Tasting time. What do you think?
Yeah, it's very tasty.
Very tasty, nutty, sort of grainy flavour. Really fluffy.
Yeah, it's very fluffy.
Now, this is probably more expensive to make than a wheat flour bread, just a strong flour bread. So I will put a cost comparison on the screen right now. Meanwhile, I'm going to go off and make some chicken sandwiches with this, and we're going to have that for dinner. So that's what this looked like. Future shrimp here. It's the following morning, and this bread's still wonderfully soft. I'm going to see how well it toasts. While we're doing this, I think I'll do a nutritional breakdown of this versus a similar loaf made from just wholemeal strong wheat flour. But I think the only fair way to do the comparison is by slice or by whole loaf, because this bread has like 100 grams less dry ingredients in it than a standard loaf, even though it makes the same size of loaf. So the bread is lighter and more fluffy. But I think the only valid comparison is per slice or per loaf anyway, because you don't set out to eat a certain weight of bread, you eat a slice of bread. So anyway, the nutritional breakdown of the slice and the whole loaf of this bread versus an equivalent loaf made from wholemeal strong flour is on your screen right now. I hope that's useful.
Editing Shrimp here, just a pause for commentary on these stats. Although this variation has more carbohydrates than Mary's original, it still stacks up pretty well against regular wholemeal in that regard. I was a little bit surprised that it doesn't do so well on fibre. Of course, it's obvious that swapping out the oat fibre for oat bran was going to do that. Oat fibre has fibre right in the name, and it's pretty much entirely fibre. But I was mildly surprised that this has less fibre than regular wholemeal. Although again, that might just be because it's lighter and I'm comparing it by slice rather than weight, which I still think is valid anyway. Also interesting is how, although this is a comparison by slice, not by weight, this version thrashes the other two on protein, which of course is down to the oat bran. Anyway, back to Future Shrimp now, even though that's actually in the past for me.
Anyway, let's wait for that to toast. Yeah, I think that'll do. Now, one notable thing about this bread is it doesn't make any crumbs at all. At least it didn't before it was toasted. Maybe it will now. Not that crumbs are necessarily a desirable thing, but it's just an interesting, notable detail about this bread. So my calculations are based on the assumption of getting 12 slices of bread out of that loaf, which I think is about reasonable. This is perhaps a bit thicker than you would cut for sandwiches. Makes good toast. Anyway, back now to yesterday's shrimp to wrap up the video. So it turns out you can make this keto, or a version of it, low carb bread with oat bran instead of oat fibre, and it works really well, and it's a lovely brown bread. I hope this has been interesting. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.